Right, hello, I'm Neil from TribePad, and I'm going to be addressing what I think is the biggest challenge we have in talent acquisition. And hopefully it does follow on really nicely from the panel discussion we just heard, because actually quite a few themes that are going to build on there. Of course, we know, sourcing, finding the right number of qualified candidates is normally everybody's day-to-day problem. We saw from the poll right at the start of the day that finding candidates from different backgrounds to address our ED&I agendas is really, really important. And of course, engaging with hiring managers is always a pain. But I think despite the candidate-driven market we're currently in, despite some of the positive changes that have happened in company culture to be a bit more employee-centric, during and post-pandemic, we still have the fundamental problem that TA isn't valued in the business as much as we probably all feel it should be. Now, I'm going to share some ideas on how we can challenge that. So, presentation 101, insult your audience on slide 2. Hands up who agrees with this? Didn't think so. Just to be clear, these are not my words, but this is a genuine conversation I had firsthand with a CEO about 3 weeks ago. HR's an expensive, fluffy waste of time. Talent acquisition, they're just failed salespeople. Don't need any of that. My hiring managers can do everything. It's an overhead. Don't need it. Don't need an ATS. I'll do everything on spreadsheets. Bugger off. Thank you very much. Needless to say, I didn't make that sale. So that didn't go very well. But it did make me think that, while we may not be dealing with views quite that extreme in every case, as we heard from the panel discussion we just had, there are those views in the business where recruitment is seen as either an arm of HR that's the less sexy bit, or it's an overhead. It's a cost centre, not a profit centre. So how do we address that? Well, let's look at some of the context. So if you're a business leader, right now there is a huge amount of uncertainty in the market, probably more than there's ever been. We've got post-pandemic changes in consumer behaviour. We've got completely disrupted supply chains, which are affecting availability of goods, time to market when you can deliver product. We've got increasing demands from the workforce in terms of desire for flexibility, salary increases driven by cost of living and fuel and all of those different things. Global financial insecurity, and is Putin going to do something crazy and push the button and we'll all be out of a job? Right? We don't know right now. What that does is create uncertainty. And leaders hate uncertainty because it makes them cautious and they don't want to take risks. And as soon as they're feeling cautious, they put their hands straight in their pockets. And what is the first thing to get cut when somebody starts putting their hands in their pockets? You all know the answer to this, because it's recruitment. So, recruitment in terms of resource, in terms of budget for advertising, certainly in terms of investing in technology or trying new initiatives to try out new things, they all get put on the back burner. And there's always a reason why it's not going to get on this month's board agenda. We'll have a look at it next month. Or can't you squeeze it out for another year? Just renew what you've got for another year. So it's not the same in all sectors, of course. There are certain sectors out there right now which are absolutely red hot. So obvious ones like logistics and healthcare, where we know people are absolutely frantic. In other sectors, it's pretty much at a standstill. I was talking to somebody earlier who's literally got 3 vacancies at the moment, not replacing leavers who'd left his team recently. So it's not the same everywhere. But irrespective of which sector you're in, this isn't a list of job titles that you're hiring for, by the way. This is what we expect our recruitment team to do. So these are the different skills that we're expecting a recruiter to be an expert in, right? And it's not realistic. So I spoke to another recruitment leader literally just last week, and I've got the name of the company on here, so I'm going to try really, really hard not to say the name. They'd invested in what is a really, really smart piece of candidate relationship management and sort of auto-sourcing software. Quite a big global company, spent about 200 grand on it. Literally not being used. Brilliant piece of software. In theory, should solve loads of their business problems. And the team aren't using it because they just haven't got the headspace to learn it. They haven't necessarily got the skills to learn it. And they're just so busy filling roles, talking to hiring managers, they haven't got the time to build these really complicated, automated AI-enabled sourcing campaigns. So we probably all have this experience, right? If you use Microsoft Excel, how many different buttons and options are there at the top? If you can do VLOOKUPs and pivot tables, give yourself a pat on the back. but most of us are using about, yes, I saw you pat yourself on the back. Most of us are using about 10% of what Microsoft Excel can do, right? And it's the same with pretty much any software out there, whether it's in recruitment or something else. And the result of that is we don't deliver the benefits we thought we were going to get. And we end up in this reactive sort of post and pray instead of the forward-looking, strategy-driven, value-adding talent acquisition where, you know, we'd all rather be, where there's a lot more job satisfaction. So again, something that came up in the panel discussion there, we all know that recruiters need marketing skills. So whether it's sourcing candidates, you know, designing these campaigns for talent pooling, as simple as writing, you know, the copywriting skills for the job adverts that we want to put together. There's loads of reasons why there is overlap between recruitment and marketing. And I find this really interesting. My background's in marketing. And if I go back to that CEO who I spoke to, the irony is he spends a fortune on marketing. Most CEOs and CFOs, in my experience, see marketing in the same bracket as HR and recruitment. It's an expensive overhead. It's the people who talk bollocks and sit on beanbags and play with crayons, right? There's not a very positive view of marketing in the boardroom, and I think there's a lot of similarities between that and TA. So I'm going to share with you some ideas of things that have worked for me in terms of how I've got round that challenge in convincing leadership that they should invest in marketing and why it's a profit centre and not a cost centre. So let's get into it. So if you do happen to have an interest in marketing, you may well recognise this guy. So he's called Mark Ritson. He's absolutely the guru in British marketing. He's really, really well-paid columnist for Marketing Week. Quite a controversial, interesting guy. Also happened to be my advertising tutor at Lancaster University. And one of the things that he did was, back in November, did a really, really important series on how you deal with marketing in a recession. Now, we know now we might not actually technically be in recession, but we're definitely in some sort of economic squeeze for sure, whatever the special name for it is. After recruitment, what gets cut next? Marketing budget, correct, right? So I feel your pain, right? We are in the same boat here. So brace yourselves, I'm going to share some academic branding theory with you and some academic research. So this is from a book called The Long and the Short of It. It's based on the 1920 Great Depression in America, okay? And it's basically comparing the financial performance of thousands and thousands of companies and the variation between them based on what their attitude was to advertising during that big depression in 1920, okay? So we'll go one row at a time. So the top row, you've got the companies who did no advertising, right? They're the benchmark. So they're the norm, that's 100. So the people who did no advertising or didn't change what they did, that's our benchmark. So the next line down, the companies who decreased advertising, they start to fall behind quite quickly. So 95, 96, 98, down to 97. So they're performing 3 points worse, worse than the companies who didn't advertise. Contrast that with the people who increased their advertising during that recession period. And in year one, they're all the same. There's no great benefit in year one because everybody's in a recession and they're all worrying about being in a recession, right? But what happens really quickly is those companies who maintained and grew their advertising during that recession period, they actually accelerate out of it much, much faster. So by the time you get to the end, there's a 24-point difference between those who increased their advertising and those who decreased their advertising. Okay, so why do we care about this? What's the read across into recruitment and TA? Well, I'll use Mark Ritson's words here because he's a really brilliant writer. So I thought about using ChatGPT to summarise it, and I just thought, no, let's just put his words on the screen, right? So in case studies going back over a century, the story is always the same. The companies that maintained ad spend or even increased it during a recession saw little advantage during the hard months of the squeeze. But the minute the green shoots of growth appeared, their growth was spectacularly superior versus competitors that cut back during the recession. Okay, still with me? There's a bit of a risk, this, going on a sort of branding academic route, but we'll go with it. Simpler terms, the Great Ayrton Senna, you can't overtake all these cars in the sun, you've got to wait till the rain's coming. So, we're all here in the room sharing thoughts on how we can make TA a more strategically valued part of the business. But let's not kid ourselves. We are also in competition with each other in terms of the best candidates in the market. That's what we're all trying to do. So whether we're in recession or not, there's certainly constrained times, and I'm absolutely convinced that there is a hesitancy to invest in recruitment right now because people are keeping their hands in their pockets. And I think what we should be doing is convincing our business leaders to be thinking about recovery, not recession. They should be thinking about what comes next and how we lay the foundations to accelerate out of it and outperform those competitors who are being too cautious. So we said, certain sectors are undoubtedly hit harder than others. And if we look back a couple of years ago, retail, hospitality, transport, brutal time for those sectors, particularly airlines. And we've all read in the media how the cutbacks have then impacted their ability to recover, right? Some of you, I'm sure, queued at various different airports, right? How good an experience with that? How has that impacted their EVP? How has it affected their ability to fill shifts and actually get planes off the ground and actually bring the revenue in? I'm sure, and I really hope, there will be some academic research done on this so that instead of it being it's kind of obvious, if you lay a load of people off, of course it's going to be hard to recover, particularly if you laid off your TA team, because then how are they going to recruit the people who are going to get you out of the recovery? It seems bloody obvious, right? But there doesn't seem to be any academic research on it yet. So I really hope there will be, because I'm absolutely convinced that same pattern is going to be found. So in terms of a positive example of how we can use this, does anybody recognise this guy? So he's called, good, nods at the back there. So he's called Danny, really experienced TA leader. He set up a company called Foresight, based in Nottingham. Basically, what Danny and his co-founder have done is form a really smart company that really links the problem and the benefit that's easily communicable to the C-suite in terms of what the problem is. So essentially what they've done is look at building a platform which collects a forward-looking view of the recruitment requirements of the organisation. So it's basically workforce planning, but quite a smart way of solving the problem. And really what it does is it gives TA teams, on average, a 100-day lead time in terms of when that requisition's needed. So instead of the rec landing on your desk and say, this person's leaving in 30 days' time, go find me, you get the 100 days further out view, and therefore you can be a whole lot more strategic about it. And what they've done is focus on empty chair time as a stat. Again, in the panel session we just heard about, talking to non-TA people about time to hire and cost to hire and time to fill and that sort of stuff. They're just not that interested in it. So find a problem that they are interested in. So Danny was working with a pretty large global company, looking at the sales force, and they worked out pretty quickly that for every day they had a vacancy in this particular team, it was costing them $247, okay? And on average, that chair was empty for 128 days. You can see where we're going to go with this, right? 2,000 vacancies a year. If anybody's better at me than maths, you can do this in your head. Anybody going to shout out a number? I didn't think so. $70 million. So this is a $70 million problem for this company, which all of a sudden starts to get the interest of the CEO, particularly if they're looking at how do we come out of a downturn. So their business case didn't have to be rocket science. We're just going to improve this problem by 10%, and that's worth 7 million quid. So invest 100K in our software, that sounds like a pretty good return on investment, doesn't it? And guess what? It was. And guess what? They've actually delivered a better than 10% improvement. So finding the right pain points and collecting those from the business leaders and then getting the finance business partners bought into that problem and then testing those assumptions means you end up with your own no-brainer business case that the business has built for you because it's you solving their problems. So hopefully that sort of makes sense. We're a talent acquisition platform, so we've put together this guide about how do you go about building this business case. We come up with these 7 different tips of how to make a compelling business case that solves those problems that that the leaders are looking for. And again, as was touched on in the round table, which I was really, really pleased about, there's no benefit in talking to the C-suite about number of requisitions you've got per head and how busy we are and how we need more resource, right? That's not going to fly. There's a little bit talking about candidate experience. Some CEOs, some HRDs are more switched on to that and the link to your brand and your presence in the market than others. Time per hire, cost per hire, yeah, maybe getting somewhere. But if you're really looking at cost avoidance, reduced advertising, reduced agency spend, and particularly a direct link to profit in terms of empty chair time and how that links to your revenue, whether it's a nurse filling a shift, whether it's a driver on a train, where you've got a clear link between an empty chair and lost revenue, that is where you can get the business interested and excited and where you can get them to put their hands in their pockets. I'm just briefly going to touch on ChatGPT because actually, quite often I find that strategic leaders, while they do want to talk about finance for 95% of their lives, they do spend a little bit of time on strategy. And sometimes they'll read something in the news and go, what's your opinion on this? And actually, as TA leaders, it's vital we've got an opinion on it. Even if the opinion is, actually, it sounds like snake oil, we're just going to wait and see for the minute. We're not going to rush into this stuff, but we're going to keep an eye on it. That's a completely valid strategy for now on this new technology. So what I would say is if you've actually had a play with it yourself, or you've been on, there's loads of different, webinars and things you can join to see examples. If you have had a play with it, it is actually pretty interesting and pretty exciting and could make some really big changes and some big impacts that we need to be aware of. Now, I'm not going to go on a long session about ChatGPT. So the only tip I'm going to give you as a software vendor where we have to be really serious about security is don't be the person who goes and installs a keylogger on your software because you're experimenting with some ChatGPT plugin in your browser. So if you are going to experiment with it in terms of creating job descriptions or sourcing candidates or creating marketing material for your talent pool, that's all fine, it's all good, go for an experiment. Just be really careful what you're installing on your laptop because it's a little bit Wild West out there at the moment and you should check with your IT department. Okay, sermon over. Right, so I'm going to finish off with a bit of research that we've done quite recently, because again, looking at what do the C-suite want to hear. They want to hear from people who are looking outside the business, because external data is often more valuable than what's happening inside the business, because we look internally, that just leads us to keep doing the same things over and over again. So we've done some research just recently into what candidates are currently thinking, what they're feeling, and how that affects their behaviour during the recruitment process. So again, you can see in terms of the timing, we said with the recession ahead, what are the things you're most worried about, right? Is it job security? Is it pay and benefits? Is it flexibility? So the number one thing that came up was people are worried about money. Now, quite often research tells you the stuff you would expect to see the answer. So right at the top here, we've got pay freezes. Half of people worried about that. Reduction in pay value relative to the cost of living. Bonuses being cut, actual pay cuts, losing shifts, employee benefits being cut. That is the number one thing people are worried about right now. They are also worried a little bit on flexibility, on security, sorry. So is there more chance of losing a job? I better stay put because there's a bit of danger out there. I'm not sure I should move around. Let's just wait and see. People are cautious in the same way leaders are cautious. And then flexibility is a bit of a concern as well. Some people are worried about being pushed back into the office, they're worried about being pushed back into certain shift patterns, and that's affecting their behaviour in the recruitment process. So if you're moving around or you're thinking of moving around, what are you looking for right now? Well, probably the biggest factor on whether you're going to change jobs is how happy are you in the current job, right? Do you like your colleagues? Are you paid enough? Is it challenging? Can you get out of bed in the morning? That's probably the single most biggest driver. So the good news, 50% happy in my job. Okay, great. From a retention point of view, that sounds pretty good. But that means 50% of people out there aren't happy in their job. So as recruitment leaders, that sounds like a great opportunity to me. Half of the people out there aren't very happy, but they're already employed, so presumably they're all right. So you can go after those people. So how do we get them to move? So the people who aren't moving, either they can't find something better, or a really big one is it's too time-consuming, it's too difficult. They can't find the right roles. So there's a really significant pool of candidates here who we could be going after if we can articulate why this job's better and why it's going to be easy to apply for and why it's going to be an easy process that isn't going to require too much effort, because people are worried about lots of other things right now. So You've probably all read the same horror stories as me you see on LinkedIn, where somebody's gone to 57 interviews and done 14 different tests and then had another interview with the director and then haven't heard for 3 months and blah, 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 right? So it takes too long. Candidates drop out of it. They just won't tolerate it. I know there's a lot of information on here, so we'll go into this another time, right? But one of the really key things that's important for us that we took out of this, right at the top there, 67% of candidates still expect to have an in-person face-to-face interview. So, you know, we all thought during COVID that video interviewing was in and it was here to stay and all that sort of stuff. Candidates don't think so, right? Next one on there, and I agree with Estelle from Arctic Shores if you were here for that session earlier, right? CVs are bollocks, we all know that. But candidates are as wedded to them as hiring managers are. So how are we going to change that process? And, you know, RefApp as well talked about the benefits of structured interviews and real work-based tests and all that sort of data that we all know academically is a far better predictor of hiring success. But in the same way, hiring managers, just give me some CVs and I'll book some interviews, right? The candidates are actually expecting the same. So there's a few challenges there for us in how do we change that behavior inside the company and recognize that it's really hard to change behavior outside the company as well. Okay, so I'm going to leave you with the salesy bit. Sorry, we have sponsored it and paid, so I've got to do the salesy bit, but I'll make it really quick. Right, so a quick word about TribePad. We're on a mission to deliver more smiles at work. So happier recruiters, happier candidates, happy employees. Fosway say we're a strategic leader. IDC say we're a major player. That's it. Not quite. So yeah, we're a talent acquisition platform. So it's applicant tracking system, onboarding, 25 million people users worldwide in 16 languages. Loads of companies you've heard of, users from people who swim underneath the Arctic with a camera with Attenborough, to Vicars in the Church of England, to shelf stackers at Tesco, and everything in between. Also delighted we've got some of our partners in the room here today. We've got more than 100 different integrations from recruitment marketing, candidate assessments, background checks, and of course all your HR, payroll systems and all that sort of stuff. So you get end-to-end reporting, you can understand what happens and deliver those all-important data-driven decisions that the C-suite want to see. So I'm going to leave you with the conclusions. So recession or not, there is caution in the boardroom, and that translates into an unwillingness to invest in stuff that we want. If we want to be seen as valuable and get those resources that are hard to come by, it's absolutely vital that we're seen as value add and not a cost center to be cut and squeezed. And to get that, you know, you need to have definitive, easily communicable benefits that the C-suite can quickly understand. And the best way to do that is with data. And, you know, with the right focus on finance and strategy, truly believe that talent acquisition leaders like yourselves can get the credit that we certainly think you deserve. So thank you very much. Happy to take questions.